Drahí televízni diváci, v dnešnej časti relácie sa spolu s nami poprechádzate výnimočne vnútrom budovy, aké bohatstvo v sebe skrýva a aký odkaz nesie, sa dozviete v priebehu relácie. Mojím dnešným vzácnym hosťom je pán Andrew Rajec. Vítajte.
Pozdravujem všetky.
Veľmi pekne. Avšak my prejdeme do angličtiny, so let's switch into English this time and let's start walking not only in this building but also in your life.
Okay, great.
Let's start talking about the very beginning of your life, about your childhood. Where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1942, from Slovak parents on both sides. Grandparents came from Horní Moštenec, Western Slovakia, and also Dubnica in Western Slovakia. They met in Milwaukee when they came over in the early 1900s, and I became a product of them.
Did they ever tell you stories about their home country, about Slovakia, about their heritage?
Yes. Now, at those days, a lot of people, some people didn't want to remember too much because it was a hard time. But I remember my grandmother saying that the hard time that she had when she was a peasant girl, working in, when she was a youngster and a teenager, working in the fields. And the fields were owned by the Hungarians, and so the Slovak people really were landless peasants, and that sort of kept me in my mind throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. How else do you remember your childhood? What was precious to you about your childhood that you still like going back to in your memories?
My childhood was good. I was raised up in a Catholic Slovak family, and we had a church, Svatý Stefan, St. Stephen's, that was located in Milwaukee, and we had a nice community, a lot of activities, and we worked Slovak picnics every year, and we participated in nice events. So it was a happy childhood.
Could you tell us a little, we will sit here for a little while, could you tell us a little bit more about this parish, how you remember this parish, if it was a lively parish?
Well, St. Stephen's originally was in the inner city of Milwaukee, and was a Slovak parish entirely. After it was founded in 1905. About 1950, the parish moved because the area became, as many of these inner city parishes have changed, they were forced to move to the suburbs. So the parish moved. And it moved to a area that was in a suburban area, and it became more of a territorial parish as opposed to an ethnic parish. But even then, the cooperation among the parishioners was good. So it was a very pleasant time. A lot of good cooperation between families and between individuals. So the parish did well. It thrived. It thrived.
Do you remember any good role models that you met in the pastors?
Well, there was especially a priest, was Father Cyril Janicek, who was a assistant pastor at that time, and he eventually became a chaplain, a Navy chaplain, and he was a good role model because he worked with the kids, worked with the youth. And at that time, I was in my early to late teens, and he had a ability to work with teenagers. So he was very good.
Do you think it's important in the parishes in general so that there are different pastors for different groups of people? If, of course, it's possible. It's not always possible, but...
Well, I think I mentioned to you before, there's one of the strengths of these evangelical churches these days. It looks like they have a lot of pastors or sub-pastors or whatever they call them. They try to reach out to certain age groups. And so they have age groups, say between 5 and 10, age groups for teenagers, age groups for young adults. And I think that's something that the Catholic Church has to revive, to get close to the teenagers, especially close to the young people, young adults, because they are the future of the Catholic Church.
Definitely. When we go back, you mentioned that it became less an ethnic church. Do you think that it's important that churches nowadays still stick to their language, stick to the Slovak traditions?
Well, we'd like to see it if it's possible. It's unfortunately, things have changed. Times have changed, and we know that. We've seen that in our society. Things have changed. I call it, this is the great melting pot, and everybody knows that America is a great melting pot. So we like to go back to the old days, and we sometimes listen to the old Slovak records or pictures in Slovakia. Slovakia has changed. America certainly has changed. So that will never come back again like it was in 1920 or 1915 or at that time. Time marches on. So we try to preserve as much of our, certainly of our Catholic identity. We certainly, that's our primary goal. But we like to preserve as much of our Slovak identity also.
What would you say that were characteristics of Slovak people that came to this country and the times were hard and difficult? What were their specific characteristics that helped them become successful or...
Well, Slovaks, I think, traditionally have been hard workers. They're willing to do things that other people won't. And that certainly was true in the Cleveland area, was true in Milwaukee. Cleveland area where people, they had a steel mill here. So there were a lot of machine shops here in the Cleveland area. People are hard workers. Slovak people are hard workers. I'm sure that's true in also in Slovakia today. That's why the car companies are happy to have the workers from Slovakia.
What do you think is so specific and typical for Slovaks as far as faith is concerned?
Well, faith has been a strong motivator for Slovaks. Obviously, the faith has been carried on for hundreds, 1,000 years since Cyril Methodius. As I read the Slovak history a little bit more, and I hear about the Reformation and re-reformations, the Catholic Church has gone through various phases over a period of time, but the Slovak people have always been faithful to their church and to their faith, and I think that's what's kept them as a small group of people, 3 to 5 million people. That was a bond to keep them together. I think that has been a real positive for the Slovak people.
When speaking about faith, what was your journey of faith? Did it start in your family? Do you remember that it were your parents or grandparents?
Well, it started really with my grandmother, because she'd teach me the prayers in Slovak, Pana Maria. So it started when I was young, and it carried over when I was going to school, and it kept on going when I was at the Catholic high school. I went to the Jesuit school, Marquette High School, and then I went to Marquette University, and then I graduated from Marquette University Law School also. So I'm ingrained in the Jesuit tradition, and I've been thankful for all that.
What could you tell us about this tradition? How Jesuits formed also your life?
The Jesuits, some people have a conception that the Jesuits are liberal. I've never found that out. I think they've been actually quite conservative. At least the professors that I've dealt with over the years are exactly quite conservative, and I think they base it on logic, but for example, on why are we here? You have to come down with you have to believe. You can build up a logical reason why we're here, but it's ultimately a faith issue. And I think that's something we have to accept as a gift of faith.
Do you remember any specifically favorite teacher of yours that that he was outstanding in a way for you?
I remember for good and bad. I remember the Father Ports. I did not do very good in Algebra 1. But he was patient, and by the time I got Algebra 3 as a junior, I got A's. So I was very happy with that. Everybody's different. Priests are different, Jesuit or whatever it may be. I generally have got a good recollection of my childhood.
Mm-hmm. How did your life kind of continue after finishing school?
Well, actually, I graduated from Marquette High School. I went to law school. I went to Marquette University, and at that time, the draft was in 1960s. Mm-hmm. So I went to ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Course, at Marquette University, and so then I had to spend 2 years in the Army, which I did, mm-hmm. and I did 2 years in the Armored Cavalry.
What was the maybe most precious experience that you have from this period of life?
The Army is a building block, but in many respects, you have to be mature enough to handle it, and not all people are. Mm-hmm. So kids that are into 17, 18 years old, they can be influenced very easily by bad influences. Mm-hmm. So I think having your faith, a balance in your faith, a rock in your faith helps you in that kind of experience, mm-hmm. because it can be very trying. There's a lot of temptations in the world, mm-hmm. As we all know, especially in that kind of atmosphere, because you're away from home, entirely new atmosphere. So it's important. It's mm-hmm. important. I think that military service is important, but hopefully that people can be mature enough to handle it.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned becoming mature enough, what do you think helps people become mature? Well,
faith, I think, is certainly a factor in maturity. Mm-hmm. It helps you to get some kind of a grounding. You've got something to believe in. And without having something to believe in, younger people can be lost. And mm-hmm. we're seeing that happening a lot today, especially with the drug epidemic we have and everything else, especially in the United States and, mm-hmm. of course, around the world. So having a grounding in your faith, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm. What about your work? I know that you are a very dedicated man, dedicated to what you do. So could you kind of a little bit invite us into this story?
Well, I'm the president of First Catholic Slovak Union. The First Catholic Slovak Union, and we call it a Fraternal Benefit Society, was founded in 1890 here in Cleveland, Ohio. It actually was a conglomeration of several smaller societies that got together, some of them as far away as Streator, Illinois, under the direction or under the urging of Father Furtick. Mm-hmm. And Father Furtick's an interesting man. He came from Slovakia, Trstna, Slovakia, and at the request of the bishop here to work with Slovaks that in their own language. Mm-hmm. And he came in around 1900, I forget the exact date. But he became, interesting enough, he became a pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes Church, which is a Czech church. Mm-hmm. And he never became a pastor of a Slovak church. But he also was involved in the founding of the Slovak League of America, which at that time was a very, very powerful organization, because this was during that World War I period when the Slovaks were trying to help the Slovaks in Europe to get a country for themselves. And that resulted in the state of Czechoslovakia, and then we know what happened again with that. Mm-hmm.
What would you say that is the main mission of Slovak Catholic Union?
Our mission, we actually have a dual mission, so to speak. One is we preserve our Catholic faith, and we want to advance our Catholic faith. Mm-hmm. And number two is to honor our Slovak heritage. And part of that is we try to provide a financial stability for the members, mm-hmm. and also try to provide activities for members from youth to older ages.
Mm-hmm. When we should tell to people in Slovakia, what are some of the events that are kind of supported by the Slovak Catholic Union?
Well, one example is we have we built the shrine at the Basilica in Washington, D.C. That was built in the mid-'60s. And that at that time was a $700,000 project, which was big money at that time. And that is probably one of the most visited shrines in the entire Basilica. And we just had a pilgrimage last year at the shrine. And we have one every year, but last year we especially did. Mm-hmm. We had our board meeting there. And as a matter of fact, we then went at the invitation of the ambassador to the Slovak embassy. Mm-hmm. So we had a very nice crowd. I think we had about 300 to 400 people at church, and we had about that same number of people at the embassy. Mm-hmm. So it turned out to be very successful, and it was good on everybody's part.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that the pilgrimage is an important part for Slovaks to stick together, also in their faith?
There's a sort of a tingle that goes down my spine when you hear Slovak singing, especially women when they harmonize and they sing these Slovak hymns. They've got a lot of beautiful Slovak hymns, and that's a memory I have for years.
That's beautiful. What about your connection to Slovakia? Do you have a chance to go and visit? When was the first time maybe you went to the country, and what was it like for you?
Well, the first time I was in 1966. This was about a month after I got out of the service, and I had a buzz haircut, a flat haircut, and I looked like an American GI. And I had a very interesting trip. I had relatives there, and so I went to in Dubnica. So I went by myself. Actually, I went from United States, and I went through Iceland, and then to Germany, then to Germany, Austria, mm-hmm. and then took the bus over to Slovakia. And I didn't have any problem at all with Slovakia. In fact, my relatives wanted to. This was the time that they had this large armament plant in Dubnica. And my relatives who worked there encouraged me to come and visit. And I did not, because I didn't want to get them in trouble. I didn't know what the repercussions would be. But I had taken about 20 rolls of film and during my trip in Slovakia. And I recall what happened when I was leaving the country. Of course, they checked all your baggage. And the young guy went through all my baggage. He saw the 20 rolls of film and didn't say anything, just closed it up and let me go. So for some reason, the only negative I had was I did with Tuzik, and I had a problem with because I ran out of oil. And that's the only problem I had in Slovakia. But I remember one of the policemen stopped me because my car, the Skoda that I had at the time, that I was renting, had some problems. So he came over, and he was very, very nice. And I can't remember what village it was, but he was very, very nice. And I bought a lot of zhuvačku along with to hand out to the kids. Because at that time they were telling me, how long you have a lot of zhuvačku, you're okay. So I had a great trip. And that was '66. And I spent about 3 weeks in Slovakia at that time. Last time we've been there after I got married. We've been there about 4 times since. Mm-hmm. The last time was 2013 with the Catholic Federation, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And I've seen the changes in Slovakia, as I think I've told you, in the early 1960s, mid-1960s. Slovakia, to me, looked like it was 50 years behind the United States as far as material housing, things like that. We went there last year, and the changes are dramatic. We walked along that the river walk on the Danube. I think in many respects, Slovakia is reached the caliber of certainly the United States in many respects, mm-hmm. Maturely. So it's tremendous change. So I give a lot of credit to the hardworking Slovaks that brought that up.
Could the Slovaks who come here to this country learn something from the mentality of the Americans, on the other hand?
Yeah, I think they can learn some bad things and they can learn some good things. But I think, unfortunately, you probably can learn bad things easier than the good things. I think that the Slovaks that I've seen, that I've met, that I know, that came here from Slovakia in the last 20 years, have done very well, by and large. There's a tendency to try to get away from the local community, and I think that's what's happened in years past also. We talked about that there's a tendency to try to separate themselves from Slovaks, to get their own identity, and that's understandable. But I think as long as a lot of Slovaks stick together, and I think which is good, and I think they ought to keep that in mind to do that. In our case, for example, we've hired a lot of Slovak people in our office. That's not a requirement that you're Slovak, but in the last hiring, we've hired 7 people since I've been here, new people, and 6 of them are Slovak. 6 of them are, because we believe that to help our own, and that's our philosophy.
Do you think that we as Slovak people are able to be proud of who we are?
We should be. We should be. And unfortunately, sometimes people haven't been proud of their heritage, and some of the kids are afraid to admit that they're Slovak. So they should be proud of what they are, because the history of the Slovak people is long suffering, but that is one of the things that's kept them together, because the difficulty, and they've endured all these years, and they've done a great job.
We also, for a very short time before this TV show, we discussed that the parishes, Slovak parishes or parishes who are trying to stay Slovak, and Slovak Catholic Union can have something in common, and that is that they have to try to think about the future.
Yes.
And what would you say is important to be able to survive for the future?
Well, what's happened, either by happenstance or by intentionally, a lot of the Slovak parishes that were founded by Slovaks primarily across the United States, a lot of them here in the Pennsylvania, small towns, also in Ohio, is that as the population changes because of the mobility of people, younger people are very mobile these days, and so it's hard to retain that cohesiveness in their parish. And how can you do that? It's hard. We've been trying to figure out how to do that ourselves. One of the things that we're trying to do is to provide, well, first of all, financial benefits. And the other thing is to try to have other activities that we can possibly do to keep these people active and keep people tied to our society.
Keep people engaged, right?
People engaged, no question about it.
But we also discussed a little bit, when we want to keep people engaged, we have to be able to delegate and to kind of think about the new generation, right? That's
been part of our problem in our society, and problem not just by ourselves, but this is true through many of the ethnic societies, and we're not the only ones, that at some point in time, including myself, that you have to pass the baton, so to speak, to the younger generation. And sometimes we have not got those younger generations involved in their 20s and 30s. So by the time we say, well, why don't you get you involved, they're not interested because it's too late. So we have to make a conscious effort to do that as much as possible.
So we wish you a lot of God's blessing to this effort. Thank you for your time and for the experience you were willing to share with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Veríme, drahí televízni diváci, že aj táto relácia mohla byť pre vás obohatením a prajeme vám krásny zvyšok dňa.